If you like the Young Turks podcast, I think you'll love a lot of the podcasts on the TYT network. Old School, it's one of my favorites, one of the favorites for a lot of the listeners. Please check that out, subscribe, share it. That makes a big difference, and give it a 5-star rating. Thank you. All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Jake Ugranik is sparing with you guys. Lovely day ahead, is it? Trump's at the National Prayer Breakfast causing trouble, but so are we. So in the second segment, in the first segment we'll talk about Trump, but in the second segment, hang in there for our interview with the Democratic leader of the National Prayer Breakfast and why are there any Democrats at the National Prayer Breakfast, which is led by a right-wing organization that pushes right-wing agendas and Russian agenda. So that's insane that anybody's going. We'll discuss that a little bit later in the program. And then Republicans kick out Parkland survivors. Green New Deal is announced today. That's a giant, giant story. And my favorite story of the day, which is in relationship to that, Nancy Pelosi's very snide, sarcastic comments about the Green New Deal. Washington, D.C. lives in their own alternative facts. They laugh at Trump for all of his lies and the absurdities, etc. But they all agree to fictions that are preposterous and easily disprovable. Nancy Pelosi is a progressive leader. Really? She's making fun of the Green New Deal and basically laughing in people's faces and saying, of course we're not gonna do that, right? What part of her is progressive? They're like, but if you say that, they find that reporters will take offense on behalf of Nancy Pelosi. Who are these folks?
I mean, reporters have been willingly hoodwinked into moving the entire country to the right. They have been easily bullied by right-wing conservatives in the United States, and they have essentially allowed them to draw the narrative of what this country is about and what the American people actually want. So I am in a really bad mood, and if you want to go after the media, today is the day to do it because I'm ready to go.
Yeah, well, that'll probably happen. In other programming today, we had an interesting Old School episode, by the way, last night. Check that out if you remember. On Rebel headquarters today, someone who is going to explain the climate change a little bit more, and then a progressive Israeli fighting for the left wing in Israel. So don't miss that. Obviously, members get all the shows anytime they want. tyt.com/join to become a member and get all of our shows. All right, Anna, what's next?
All right. The National Prayer Breakfast took place, and every president since the National Prayer Breakfast began has spoken at the event. Donald Trump spoke at the event this year, and there were some interesting things he had to say. Now, keep in mind that his speech is on a prompter, but even though it's on a prompter, he somehow said this.
Since the founding of our nation, many of our greatest strides, from gaining our independence to abolition of civil rights, to extending the vote for women, have been led by people of faith.
So how do I know he's on a prompter? First of all, he's using words that aren't in his typical daily, vocabulary, and he seems very bored with what he's doing at this moment.
Yeah, the reason he's on a prompter is because this is the National Prayer Breakfast, and he has to pretend to be religious. So there's a lot of reference to God that he just doesn't even understand, has never said in his life, etc. And they're trying to keep him within decorum because they're like, look, evangelicals are here. It's about prayer, etc. So don't be an idiot like you normally are. Go off the cuff and say outrageous, horrible, offensive things in the midst of this thing that's supposed to particularly emphasize getting along together. It's supposed to be bipartisan. I think that's nonsense. It's totally right wing, and Trump proved it, as we'll show you in a minute. But keep him under control, right? But he doesn't do his homework, so he didn't bother reading the prompter ahead of time. So that's why when he says we should be proud that religious leaders did abolition of civil rights, he doesn't catch the mistake. Like, look, he obviously misread it.
How do you screw that up? How do you screw that up? It's like, did he mean abolition? What did the script say?
Okay, I have a guess as to what the script said and what he screwed up. So by the way, I don't know anyone that's saying that he said it on purpose. So right wing will then get all, they love to get hurt. So they'll get triggered and they'll be like, oh my God, you guys are saying it. No, we're not saying it. we're being incredibly fair to him. We don't think he meant that, okay? So I think that it was probably either written as adoption of civil rights.
Okay.
And he said abolition of civil rights.
Got it.
You could say it might have been a Freudian slip, right? Or abolition and civil rights. Because religious leaders did lead the abolition movement in a lot of ways and did lead the civil rights movement in a lot of ways, i.e. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. So those are two plausible explanations. But if you read abolition of civil rights, you'd probably pause and go, yeah, no, that's not what we meant, and correct yourself, right? He doesn't know, he doesn't care, he didn't notice.
It doesn't even seem like he's processing what he's reading, right? Because any other person who's processing, even if you're reading it for the first time, you're processing it as you're reading it, right? And it seems like he's not really doing that. He doesn't really seem present in the moment. So you're right, none of us are thinking that he purposely said that. I think that he did misspeak. But with that said, there were portions of his speech where he said things that he meant to say. And what we're about to show you is a perfect example of that. Now, before we get to the video though, I wanna make sure you guys fully understand what the National Prayer Breakfast is. Because even though both Democrats and Republicans attend the National Prayer Breakfast, it is not a bipartisan event. It is very much a right-wing event. And there have been a number of experts, including one author who has written a great book about the National Prayer Breakfast. So let me give you some more details about it. The annual event has become an international influence peddling bazaar where foreign dignitaries, religious leaders, diplomats, and lobbyists jockey for access to the highest reaches of American power. That was written by the New York Times some years ago. The National Prayer Breakfast is used to circumvent the State Department. They are arranging meetings with a real who's who of nasty figures, the kind of government leaders from foreign nations. And also foreign nations who might not otherwise have access to American power, but who the family, in pursuit of their strongman vision of Jesus, thinks are actually anointed by God for leadership.
So TYT Investigates has done some brilliant work on this that we'll share with you a little bit later in the show. But just in regards to that particular angle, TYT Investigates asked for whether they were going to respond with any new rules for the Fellowship Foundation in regards to this breakfast about influence peddling, because everybody knows this for influence peddling. In fact, another part of the TYT Investigates reporting was they talked to one of the top intelligence officials at the CIA, who used to work at the CIA, that told them governments like Russia target groups like this to infiltrate because they have a lot of influence and there's no oversight. Since it's a religious group, their American government is scared to death of touching it. So they have wide leeway and it's really easy to penetrate and be able to spread their agenda throughout that group. And in fact, we know through the Mueller indictments, and again, more in TYT Investigates reporting that the Russians did infiltrate the prayer breakfast. And the prayer breakfast actually, an affiliated group, paid 10 Russians, including Russian oligarchs and Marina Butina, who's now been arrested, to come attend the prayer breakfast. And so we found out who paid for it by accessing their records at TYT Investigates. You should check out all those articles at tyt.com/investigates. By the way, that reporting group brought to you by Young Turks Audience. Thank you for doing that. It's been some brilliant work. So these guys are obviously influence peddling. Now the new policy they put out is, well, no, okay, we're not going to do that anymore.
Right.
That's the whole point of the breakfast, but okay, at least we got them to put that policy out.
So there are certainly foreign influences at this event, but more importantly, at the heart of the event is, a right-wing religious agenda. And so it's no surprise that Donald Trump would talk about what his administration is specifically doing to help religious people in the United States discriminate against groups of people that they dislike. Take a look.
To ensure that people of faith can always contribute to our society, my administration has taken historic action to protect religious liberty. Unfortunately, the Michigan adoption charity that brought the Buck family together is now defending itself in court for living by the values of its Catholic faith. We will always protect our country's long and proud tradition of faith-based adoption. My administration is working to ensure that faith-based adoption agencies are able to help vulnerable children find their forever families while following their deeply held beliefs.
So in the beginning of that clip, he references the Buck family. He's referring to Chad and Melissa Buck, who had adopted 5 children through a religious adoption agency, which is now facing a challenge by the ACLU because of the fact that it is discriminating against LGBT families who are looking to adopt. Now, it's important to also note that the ACLU is specifically going after legislation or laws that allow for these organizations to discriminate against gay couples. There was another adoption agency that not only discriminated against gay couples, but also Jewish people looking to adopt. And so the Trump administration is making the argument that, hey, yeah, I mean, it's a religious organization. If they decide they don't want to adopt to gay people or to Jewish people or to whoever, then they should be able to do that. That's called religious liberty. So it's funny how he mentions civil rights and then the religious liberty and how it should be able to discriminate in the same speech. That's
right. So I actually think that those organizations should be allowed to do that. I don't believe in religion. But they've got their own voodoo, and if they want to practice it, so the one that Anna's referencing is called Miracle Hill. It's in South Carolina, and they don't let Jews adopt kids because then they'd go to no good Jews, right? And you want them to go to Christian families. Now I put in no good, right? But to be fair to them, seriously, they want to push a certain agenda because that's the whole point, their religion. And by the way, if you believe in those religions, by definition, you don't believe in the other religions. So to be fair to those religious organizations, they think the Muslims are wrong because they're Christian. They think the Jews are wrong because they're Christian. Otherwise, they'd be Jews or Muslims. And they think LGBT is wrong. Are they massive hypocrites? Of course, they all eat shellfish and violate 1,000 other clauses in the Bible. Yes, I get all that. My point is, yeah, do all that to your heart's content, and that is religious liberty. Just don't ask me for my taxpayer dollars because I ain't gonna give it to you.
That's exactly right. So many of these religious organizations are either tax exempt, in some cases taxpayer subsidized. Taxpayer subsidized just by the fact that they're tax exempt. So if you're gonna get those special favors, then no, you don't get to discriminate and then reference your religious liberty.
And there's other forms of funding that they get from the federal government, to which I say, on purpose, hell no. Okay, you got all the liberty in the world in America, and that's wonderful. And I would never want to oppress any of the religions. It's a terrible idea, okay? But I don't have to pay for it because I don't agree with you. I think Jewish families should be able to adopt any kids they like. I think gay parents should be able to adopt any kids that they like. And I'm not going to finance what I perceive to be your bigotry. Now you say it's not bigotry and that's your religion, and I just made a defense of that. That's fine, do it with your own money. What you're not allowed to do is claim religious freedom to discriminate against other people and say, now give me your money to do it. So why don't you get out of our lives? I thought that conservatives are against big government. No, they love big government when it gives them our taxpayer money, right? And they want to be able to use it for anything they like. And guys, if it was any other context other than religion, of course it'd be preposterous. If a group was set up to hate Jews, but it had nothing to do with religion, right? And like our job is to hate Jews, okay, now give us taxpayer money for it. Of course that's a no. Of course that's a no.
Look,
but for when it comes to religion, well, no, it's the religious freedom to hate. That's fine. Hate with your own money, not with my money.
So the question that I have, I don't know if I really agree with you about whether or not any type of religious organization can just willy-nilly discriminate against same-sex couples, especially when it comes to issues like adoption. So, I mean, my mind goes back to the issue of the bakery that refused to bake a cake for a gay couple. So here's the question, what do we value more in the United States? A country that's supposed to have a constitution that separates church and state. Do we value civil rights? Or do we value religious liberty, right, over civil rights? Because I know that businesses can't discriminate against black people. Businesses can't refuse service to someone based on their race. So why is it that we make exceptions based on, someone's sexual orientation?
No, I think that's okay, and let me explain what I mean by that. If you're running a business, if a church is running a business like a bakery or a restaurant, they can't discriminate based on race or even religion because they're running a public restaurant. That would be like banning blacks from sitting at the counter as we had in the civil rights era, right? But if they're running a church and the things associated with a church, a charity, a nonprofit, et cetera, in my opinion, if they're not taking government funds to help that in any way, yeah, they get, otherwise Jews, Muslims, atheists can come in and go, okay, now I'm part of your church. Now you got to do everything I tell you to do. And the whole point of the church is, in a sense, to be discriminatory, even for good churches that look at the great side of the religion rather than the hateful sides of the religion. They are still Christian, and by definition, not the other religions. So I think that's part of religious liberty, and obviously we have to balance all of these things. But what I find to be, and I think any sensible person would find to be unacceptable, is when they take our money to do their religious bigotry. Not on my watch and not with my money. And that should be something that conservatives can readily agree to. Whenever it comes to spending their money to help people, they're like, oh, not with my money, I don't want to help anybody. Hell no, right? Oh, undocumented immigrants teaching their kids, that's taking my money away. No, I want them to be ignorant, treating them in the hospitals. I want them to bleed to death. I don't want them doing it with my money. Religion, oh, you're gonna use it to hate people. Well, of course, take all of our money. No way, okay? So we don't agree to that, but that's why this prayer breakfast is ridiculous, and the fact that Democrats go to it is outrageous. Trump not only was made his plea against LGBT rights and adoption, but he also went after abortion. Of course he did, and he's talking about, nothing makes me nothing sicker to me than Trump talking about religion. It's kind of ironic because I'm not religious, so why do I care? His false piety is unbearable when he talks about every soul is a precious gift from heaven. Then the born and the unborn are made in the holy image of God. Get out, you never talked about God, you never cared about God. You're vomitous, man. But why is half the room Democrats going there to be like, yeah, abortion is awesome. Abortion's fantastic. Pro-life is fantastic. Let's ban women's rights and make sure they ban abortion. Why the hell are you going there to support that garbage?
Because we don't really have a Democratic Party, right? In the sense that people think we do. So the co-chair for this year is Chris Coons. He's a Democrat from Delaware, except he's not really a Democrat. Chris Coons, he went to a divinity school, Yale's divinity school. Okay, you can be deeply religious and a Democrat, but he campaigned for Ronald Reagan in 1980. This is the second time he's co-chaired the National Prayer Breakfast.
He gets money funneled to him through one of these organizations. One of his big donors is connected to the National Prayer Breakfast. All of Washington is vomitous. Look, if you got a Democratic representative, you know who went to the breakfast this year? Nancy Pelosi. Oh, big champion of women's rights. And then they attack progressives. They're like, oh, are you really sure that you're in favor of women's rights? Progressives are more in favor of women's rights than anybody else is. And then Pelosi goes and supports a anti-choice group like the National Prayer Breakfast, gives them credibility by going there, and then they're talking about how they're gonna make sure that gay people can't adopt kids, and Nancy Pelosi goes there to help them? No, thank you, no, thank you. These people, they don't know how to fight for us because they're not us. They're not progressive. Get it through your thick skulls. And I say that mainly to the Washington press, who's just like, oh, I don't know why progressives would have any issue with Chris Coons or Nancy Pelosi. They go and fluff up a group that wants to take away women's rights to choose, but I don't know why progressives would be upset with them. Well, then you suck as a journalist. It's not that hard. Well, she attacked Green New Deal. She says there's no way they're gonna do Medicare for all, but I don't know why she's not how dare you say she's not a progressive? She's not a progressive. Neither is Chris Coons, and unfortunately a majority of the Democratic Party. They're not on my team. Stop saying they're on our team when they fight against us every day.
When we come back from the break, we will talk specifically about Chris Coons. TYT Investigates ran into him, asked him some questions about the National Prayer Breakfast. What does he have to say? We'll tell you.
We need to talk about a relatively new show called the Republic, or UNFTR. As a Young Turks fan, you already know that the government, the media, and corporations are constantly peddling lies that serve the interests of the rich and powerful. But now there's a podcast dedicated to unraveling those lies, debunking the conventional wisdom. In each episode of On the Republic, or UNFTR, the host delves into a different historical episode or topic that's generally misunderstood or purposely obfuscated by the so-called powers that be, featuring in-depth research, razor-sharp commentary, and just the right amount of vulgarity. The UNFTR podcast takes a sledgehammer to what you thought you knew about some of the nation's most sacred historical cows. But don't just take my word for it. The New York Times described UNFTR as consistently compelling and educational, aiming to challenge conventional wisdom and upend the historical narratives that were taught in school. For as the great philosopher Yoda once put it, you must unlearn what you have learned. And that's true whether you're in Jedi training or you're uprooting and exposing all the propaganda and disinformation you've been fed over the course of your lifetime. So search for UNFTR in your podcast app today and get ready to get informed, angered, and entertained all at the same time.
That and more.
All right, back on the Young Turks. I've got a couple of comments for you as usual here. The Mathematician writes in from the member section, I think all churches of any kind should be taxed, period. You don't get to impose your will on the rest of us and get government subsidies to do it. Here, brother, I totally agree with that. Engineer writes, and I generally agree with allowing religious adoption agencies to follow their religion, but only if the children placed in their care are okay with that. So I don't know how we wind up checking with the children on it. Look, we're not even doing the bare minimum. The bare minimum is you can't use taxpayer dollars to discriminate. But not religions. Christianity is too strong in this country. Fundamentalist Christianity is too strong, and they just roll over, even though it's unconstitutional. Anyway, we got more on the prayer breakfast.
Yes. The National Prayer Breakfast is an annual event that TYT Investigates looked into, especially after it was disclosed that Marina Butina, who has pled guilty to some federal charges, attended the breakfast back in 2017. Now, according to TYT Investigates and its reporting, the policy, they have since changed some of the policies that they've implemented within the event and within the group because of some concern that people might feel that international actors or foreign actors would use the breakfast in order to carry out their agenda or influence US lawmakers to carry out their agenda. So as a result of that reporting, they have decided to change these policies. The policy announcement comes 2 years after Maria Butina and Alexander Torshin attended the 2017 National Prayer Breakfast, seeking to make influential connections at the elite, high-powered Washington event. Butina has since pleaded guilty to acting as a Russian operative without registering as one in the US government. So one of the people who was deeply involved with the National Prayer Breakfast and who gave Butina and other Russians access to it was Doug Burley. He was actually noted in Mueller's investigation. He gave Butina 10 tickets to the prayer breakfast back in 2017.
And one of the 10 went to one of the biggest Russian oligarchs. So the oligarchs themselves infiltrated the National Prayer Breakfast. And I don't know why any Democrat continues to go to this thing that's infiltrated by the Russians to help carry out their agenda. And TYT Investigates has reported on part of that agenda, and it is stunning. We're gonna get to that in a minute. And is against LGBT rights all across the world. And then on top of that, this year Trump goes and argues against women's right to choose there. And Nancy Pelosi, Chris Coons, and so many other Democrats go aid and abet that group by giving them legitimacy. TYT Investigates has asked other people who have attended in the past, like Ro Khanna and Ted Lieu, and they have now said that they are not attending. So some progressive Democrats are waking up to the obvious agenda of the family, as they're called, but yet so many others, like Coons, continues to support them. In fact, Coons is the co-chair.
Yes, so Coons is not only the co-chair for the National Prayer Breakfast this year, but he also served as co-chair back in 2017. And so TYT Investigates caught up with him and asked him a few questions. The reporter that you're about to hear behind the camera is Michael McAuliffe. With that said though, what did Coons have to say about the participation of Russians in the prayer breakfast back in 2017? Take a look.
Are you at all concerned about some of the stuff that came out in the indictment of Butina that mentions the foundation and the 12 or 10 Russians that
Of course.
they sent?
I mean, I think it raised questions about the process by which folks seek to participate, buy tickets, and become involved. But frankly, anytime you've got a large public gathering, you've got mixed motives coming. And I do think the vetting this year was done differently, but I, as the co-chair, am really responsible for the program, not for who ends up buying tickets.
Yeah, but if it's being used to access politicians like yourself, and you bring other Democratic politicians to it, then who attends is incredibly relevant.
Absolutely. Not only that, I mean, through this relatively short exchange with the reporter, Chris Coons made it clear to me, at least, that he's not being completely honest in his answers. So in the next video, he's going to address the issue of partisanship, because make no mistake about it, the National Prayer Breakfast is not some bipartisan event. Yes, Democrats do attend the event, but in terms of the agenda that's been outlined by the National Prayer Breakfast and in terms of the overall goals that they're trying to accomplish, it's a very much a right-wing event, okay? Now with that said, what did Chris Coons have to say about that perception of partisanship?
And
I have the Delaware State University choir waiting for me.
all right, well, could we walk and talk?
In the car right here, sir.
The problem is that, or they're curious about whether you're worried about the sort of growing sort of Republican sponsorship of it. It looks a little less bipartisan.
The question I was just answering was that, yes, I'm concerned about the perception that this is a partisan event. As a Democrat, an active Democrat, I still participate in the weekly prayer breakfast. There are as many Democrats as Republicans at our weekly prayer breakfast in the Senate, but Democrats don't talk about it very much.
Right.
And I did work closely with Senator Lankford to try and craft a program today that was not partisan and political, but instead had speakers and readings and a keynote speaker
showed
that
up.
really,
Speaker Pelosi
was present, and there were a number of Democratic senators and House members.
So Coons is relying on the fact that there were other Democrats in attendance to make a point about how this is not some sort of right-wing event. But I don't care who was there. What I care about is the type of policies that the National Prayer Breakfast pushes for, both domestically and internationally. And they push for right-wing policies, including the discrimination and the persecution of gay individuals in other countries. So the National Prayer Breakfast is not in any way, shape, or form an organization that looks out for liberal or progressive principles. It looks out for very specific, hardcore right-wing policies, period.
And look, are there religious organizations that are neutral or progressive leaning? Of course. And so there's some great nun groups out there that fight against nuclear energy and so many other, to help the homeless, the needy, et cetera. And obviously the civil rights movement in this country was led by religious leaders. Now, do you think Republicans would go to an organization that was religious but left-leaning and, for example, argued that everyone should be allowed to vote the same, and that we should have easy access to voter registration, for example, and get people out to vote in their churches, for example, in black churches, right?
Or we shouldn't allow discrimination of gay couples looking to adopt children in America. Would right-wingers go to that?
There are religious organizations that believe that advocate for that. Would they go to any of those events? And you know what the answer is, hell no. Can you imagine this organization is against a woman's right to choose? Could you imagine Republicans all in mass going to, including their leaders, going to attend an event where they're like, there's speeches about how abortion is great and should be protected inconceivable. And Coons there said, oh, we worked hard to get speakers who were not about politics. What are you talking about? Donald Trump spoke and made a forceful argument in favor of ending a woman's right to choose. How, well, if you tried really hard to make sure that it wasn't right-wing or political, you obviously failed because Trump gave a deeply political speech. So what, okay, it gets worse. So that's Michael McCall for TYT Investigates, talking to Chris Coons. Let's go to other stories that TYT Investigates covered on this same National Prayer Breakfast. They unearthed, Jonathan Larson doing most of the reporting here, at least 4 Republican members of Congress who the foundation, it's called the Fellowship Foundation, its nickname is the Family, so it goes by both, and they do the National Prayer Breakfast, okay? So the foundation sent those 4 Republican congressmen to Eastern Europe, and what were they doing there? Well, there's 2 great problems with this. One was they were helping local politicians fight against gay rights. And now some of the laws that are proposed in those countries are horrible. In the past, the Prayer Breakfast and the Fellowship Foundation that runs it has gotten into trouble for advocating similar laws in Uganda, where gay people would be executed for being gay.
Yeah, they were pushing
How could
for those
any,
policies.
before the Russians even infiltrated it, how could any Democrat go and participate in this group? And so if you don't have to be a gay rights advocate, you don't have to be gay, you just have to be a decent human being and a progressive to say that, to call your congressmen or your senators and say, don't you dare ever attend that prayer breakfast again, where they go and finance Republicans to fight against gay people's lives, let alone their rights all across the world. That's insanity. And they do it again and again, and I'm not interested in Coons's excuses. I'm glad to hear him interviewed, and we had a fair interview. We do analysis, our reporters do reporting. So they went and asked them fair questions. Those were his answers, and you could judge for yourself. But I don't find those to be sufficient answers. And sending these guys to go do that has a second element, which is also related to Russia. And I get a load of this. Now, Russia is in favor of the National Prayer Breakfast, and as Mueller has showed, they have infiltrated, and Butina was there, she's now under arrest, okay? And why does Russia care about Republicans from America going to those Eastern European countries to argue against gay rights? Because in order to be admitted into the European Union, you must have liberal laws on gay rights. And so if those countries pass laws against gay rights, they won't be admitted into the European Union, and they'll be in Russia's sphere of influence rather than Western sphere of influence. So Russia benefits greatly from the bigotry paid for by this group. And for senators like Coons to co-chair it and proudly tout about how bipartisan it is and how he brought all these other Democrats to go help these horrible right-wing causes, not interested. And Nancy Pelosi, of course, as usual, can't wait to help right-wingers and conservatives, so she rushes over and meanwhile pretending to be for women's rights. Is she for women's rights in other cases? Yes. But we need you to be progressive, not some of the time. You're supposed to be the leader of the Democrats in the House. To go help this group that is fighting against gay rights is hideous, absolutely hideous.
So there's the right-wing agenda, and then there's the influence from foreign actors, which happens without the same type of oversight that you would see in other gatherings, because this is a religious event. And so the second part is just as problematic as the first part. Knowing that there are, foreign actors that have influence over our lawmakers and the decisions that they make. I mean, that's the reason why we have specific laws pertaining to campaign donations by foreigners, right? Like, we're not supposed to have lawmakers looking out for the best interests of people living in other countries. We're supposed to have them look out for the best interests of America and Americans. Now, with that said, though, after this incredible reporting by TYT Investigates, it appears that the National Prayer Breakfast has re-implemented some of its rules and actually added on some additional rules, especially when it comes to lobbying. So let's go to graphic 34. The prayer breakfast policy calls for avoiding any conflict of interest, real or perceived. It says those involved with the breakfast may not offer or sell political influence, which includes tickets to the National Prayer Breakfast, including access to political, business, community, or religious leaders.
You know why they have to pass that new policy? Because they sold political influence to religious, political, and foreign leaders in the past.
Right.
That's why you do that. So why would you attend a group that the whole point of it is to sell political influence to you, like for people to influence Democratic senators and congressmen in a right-wing agenda or a foreign agenda? Oh, but they have a new policy that says they shouldn't. Wow, how mighty Christian of them.
But it's one thing to say, no, we now have these rules and we're gonna follow these rules, but who's to say that they will, right? I mean, they've gotten away with this type of behavior for so long, and they've been able to do it under this notion that it's a religious organization that doesn't have to abide by the same oversight that other gatherings do. So if there's not gonna be the same level of scrutiny and oversight, then how do we know that we're not gonna have foreign actors influencing our lawmakers?
Yeah, and one more thing about this. Again, TYT Investigates, which is the reporting arm of this network, went and asked the group about some of these policy proposals, including one on January 7th about it appears that some folks are doing this for personal gain. So then on January 12th, so we asked on January 7th, do you have a response to this? We run the story on January 11th, and on January 12th, the foundation puts out a new policy saying, oh, and by the way, you can't do influencing of these politicians for personal gain either. So you can't be angling there for your own business interest or foreign interest to benefit yourself, okay? So I don't know if it was us asking or the general pressure or a combination thereof, but I love that we asked. And
what's the general pressure? Like, is the New York Times like on them about this? Really? Is the Washington Post on them about this? Yeah. Oh, democracy dies in the darkness? Does it really?
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's prayer. Oh my God, it's religious people. Oh my God, I'm so scared. I don't want to offend anyone. So I wouldn't want to do journalism because I don't want to offend anyone. Okay, I mean, that's your call. So anyways, look, they've done other great reporting in the past. Jeff Charlotte's done wonderful reporting on the foundation. So there's other great reporting out there as well. Yeah. And obviously, Mueller's indictment of Butina and the mentioning of the foundation and the National Prayer Breakfast obviously had a huge influence as well. But I'm glad we followed up. I'm glad they have a new policy. I don't think it's nearly sufficient enough. And the fact that the Democrats who are obsessed with the Russian interference are still attending a prayer breakfast where the top Russian oligarchs were invited in to influence them, and they're still going to it is amazing. And by the way, not all of them. TYT Investigates reached out to Ro Khanna, who said he is not attending until they sort out what's going on here, and same with Representative Ted Lieu. So they've made the right decisions. And look, we got volunteers as well in a different branch of the company. I think maybe we should go and ask all the Democrats who are attending, including Coons and Pelosi, why do you keep supporting this right-wing group who's against gay rights, who's against choice of women, and who goes and was infiltrated by the Russians? I mean, they pretend to care about all those progressive issues, but the one issue we know they care about is Russia. And still they go to this group that was infiltrated arguably more than any other group in America. Oh my God, but it's religion, oh my God, I have to bow down to the right wing because it's religion. No, you don't. You should be serving your own voters.
When we come back from the break, I will tell you how the Trump administration is making it easier for some companies here in the US to sell flamethrowers without oversight in other countries.
At TYT, we frequently talk about all the ways that big tech companies are taking control of our online lives, constantly monitoring us and storing and selling our data. But that doesn't mean we have to let them. It's possible to stay anonymous online and hide your data from the prying eyes of big tech. And one of the best ways is with ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN hides your IP address, making your activity more difficult to trace and sell to advertisers. ExpressVPN also encrypts 100% of your network data to protect you from eavesdroppers and cyber criminals. And it's also easy to install. A single mouse click protects all your devices. But listen, guys, this is important. ExpressVPN is rated #1 by CNET and Wired Magazine. So take back control of your life online and secure your data with a top VPN solution available, ExpressVPN. And if you go to expressvpn.com/TYT, you can get 3 extra months for free with this exclusive link just for TYT fans. That's expressvpn.com/TYT. Check it out today. We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. Joy writes in the member section, the very existence of the National Prayer Breakfast is unconstitutional, given that church and state should be separate. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but all these politicians going to attend this religious organizations get together is problematic, obviously. Bob FLV writes in on Twitter using hashtag TYT Live. Hillary was a regular at the prayer breakfast, so the organization must be absolutely above board. Hillary is such a wonderful person who cares so much about people. So, well, that's, by the way, totally true that Hillary attended all the time. She was a huge backer of the National Prayer Breakfast. Me Papito writes in, a lot of gay people that love and adore Nancy Pelosi are awfully quiet about her going to the National Prayer Breakfast. And if you're wondering, by the way, why huge human rights groups, LGBT groups would be silent on an issue like that, it's because generally they fear losing access to powerful politicians. And a lot of them have been taken hostage by the Washington mindset that, well, I mean, look, I don't want to lose influence. I don't want to lose influence. So let them go and, hate on gay people and maybe even get them killed abroad. But I don't want to lose access to Nancy Pelosi. So that is why a lot of those groups that are in Washington become terribly corrupted by what they think is their genius attempt to gain access to politicians. How about you hold them accountable instead? But thank you for participating, guys. All right, you know what? I'll read one last one. YouTube super chat. Stefanik86 says, I would love to run for office, but being a female atheist progressive in Utah, I know I wouldn't stand a chance because this state is run by the Mormon Church. One, don't be so sure of that. It depends on where you live in Utah. Salt Lake City is often elected some of the most progressive mayors in the country, so it definitely does depend. And look, Kyrsten Sinema is a corporatist, and I got no love for her, but she is a Democratic senator from Arizona now, and she is atheist and lesbian and got elected anyway in Arizona. So the world is changing, so hang in there, and together let's fight for America and for real democracy so you can win anywhere. All right, Anna, what's next?
All right. The Trump administration is implementing new rules pertaining to gun manufacturers here in the United States and how they can sell guns to other countries. Now, this is a story that's been developing for quite some time, but now we have a better grasp of what the new rules indicate. And it essentially allows gun makers to sell their guns internationally with little to no oversight, and it also allows them to sell some weaponry that is problematic, especially if the United States government is gonna continue pretending like it's worried about terrorist activity in other countries. So according to the rules, gun makers will no longer need licenses from the Department of State to sell dozens of types of weapons to other countries, including semi-automatic assault weapons. Instead, though, sellers will need only a no-fee license from the Department of Commerce, which has a less onerous licensing process and a smaller global footprint, making it harder to track how the weapons are ultimately used overseas.
Oh, great. So that shouldn't cause any problems.
So this is me maybe being a little conspiratorial, but I'm just gonna share what I think happens, and I've seen it happen over and over again when it comes to our foreign policy. Now, it usually happens in a way where we arm people, abroad, and then later, the very people that we've armed end up becoming our enemies, and then we engage in war with them. And I don't think that that's done on accident. I think that that's done because we want perpetual war. But I think in this case, it's a win-win for weapons manufacturers. It's a win-win for private military contractors, because essentially, you're already starting new wars. You don't know how they're gonna develop, but you're arming We don't even know who you're arming. You're just allowing people who have a profit motive in the United States to sell this type of weaponry abroad with little to no oversight. Let me give you more details. Those who want to export flamethrowers that project a stream of fire up to 20 meters, about 66 feet, will no longer need a State Department license.
No, but to be fair, Anna, there's a lot of people defending their homes in other countries with flamethrowers and grenades. Or maybe the people who buy that kind of stuff would be the exact kind of people who might be bad guys. And let me list some possibilities for you guys. Drug cartels. And here, I'm gonna make a prediction ahead of time. I predict that there will be a story in some period of time where a drug cartel burns people alive with flamethrowers. Why? They could be the first to buy these. Now that there's no regulation, why wouldn't a drug cartel buy flamethrowers? They're gonna line up immediately to do it. Could terrorist groups then easily buy these kind of weapons in mass now? Yes, very easily. But hey, right wingers, I don't know, I thought you couldn't stand MS-13 and terrorists, et cetera, but if that's not enough for you, the government of Venezuela could buy a lot of these for their militias, for their guards that protect Maduro. Have I got your attention yet? And you say, oh, well, that won't happen.
They don't care, they don't care. None of you guys care, none of you guys care. And the thing that drives me crazy is that we enable the bad guys in various countries. We enable drug cartels both in our prohibition of drugs, okay, and in the way that we sell weaponry throughout the world. And then when they brutalize people in their own countries, and then women and children flee for safety, seeking refuge in the United States, we'll go ahead and we'll demonize the people that we have enabled others to brutalize. That's what we'll do. That's what this country is all about. And so every time I hear the jingoistic nonsense about how the United States is the best country in the world, no, we're not. How much pain and suffering does our policy, which is 100% fueled by profit motives of corporations, harm others in other countries? All the time, we do it all the time. And it's not an accident.
So the main reason for this is obvious. The NRA pays the politicians and they say, no, our gun manufacturers want to sell more weapons. Do we care that they go to terrorists or drug cartels? Why the hell would we care? In fact, then the people terrorized by those groups will have to buy weapons to counter them. And will that lead to massacre after massacre in those countries like it has in our country? Yes, and then people will buy more guns. And that is exactly the poison that we're spreading across the world because a bunch of greedy politicians needed one more campaign contribution and needed independent expenditures from the NRA. So they sold their soul, and now far more people will be murdered all across the world with semi-automatic weapons, with grenades and flamethrowers. And I guess they'll be laughing all the way to the bank. That's how deeply immoral they are.
One final part of this that you should be aware of. So there are limits in terms of the number or the amount of money that you can make through selling these weapons without oversight. And it's important for you to know. So sales of less than $1 million in arms will not require advance notification to Congress, which allows lawmakers a period of time to block a potential sale. So if you're selling under $1 million worth of weapons, you don't have to worry about Congress getting involved and blocking that sale. And I would argue that it's important for people to know what's going on. It's important to know that there's some oversight involved in what's happening because you want to know where the weapons are going. You want to know who's buying the weapons. You want to know what the ramifications will be in the future. But no, I mean, again, this country is not run by the people for the people. It's run by corporations, it's run by weapons manufacturers, it's run by private military contractors. The best interests of Americans, American citizens, or people abroad is not considered right now under this current political system. It's just not.
The only thing that the NRA ever hangs their hat on is, no, good guys need guns too to protect their families. Which good guys are spending $990,000 on weaponry? And you think that they can't get around the regulation of the $1 million by just doing 2, 3, 8 different orders of $990,000 worth of weapons? Of course they can. So they'll now be able to sell pretty much unlimited number of weapons to anyone who wants it It doesn't matter how bad of guys they are, they're never even gonna check.
I'm gonna move on to the Matt Gaetz story. So hopefully you guys are ready for it. So let's do it. Following the Trump administration's decision to allow for gun makers here in the United States to easily sell their weapons abroad with little to no oversight, members of Congress got together and started discussing common sense gun regulation, which quickly devolved once Republicans like Representative Matt Gaetz got involved. So Matt Gaetz decided, not interested about talking about how gun sales in the United States, for instance, have led to some serious mass shootings. Why don't we instead deflect and talk about something else? Take a look.
As we hear the stories and circumstances for those here, I hope we do not forget the pain and anguish and sense of loss felt by those all over the country who have been the victims of violence at the hands of illegal aliens. H.R. 8 would not have stopped many of the circumstances I raised, but a wall, a barrier on the southern border may have, and that's what we're fighting for.
Mr. Chairman.
Well,
Gentlemen will suspend.
so again, I hope that we'll deal with all of the drivers of violence. The greatest driver of violence in the circumstances that I indicated was not the firearm. It was the fact that we have an immigration system that allows people to come here violently. We engage in...
There will be no comments or demonstrations, please.
So this is a House meeting about how gun violence is, destroying the lives of countless Americans right now. And Gaetz decides, you know what? It doesn't make my donors happy to talk about this issue, so let me go ahead and deflect by demonizing undocumented immigrants and talking about Trump's border wall.
So two quick things on that. One is undocumented immigrants, we'll say this every time because apparently no one in the mainstream media is capable of doing any research. And it should be given as context every time this issue comes up. Undocumented immigrants commit half the crimes of natural-born citizens in America. So if you're worried about what creates danger for Americans, it's Americans. And so to frame it as that they are more dangerous is just counterfactual. It's not true, it's a lie, okay? And Matt Gaetz knows that and he lies on purpose. So the bigger issue is actually the violence that is happening here, created by natural-born citizens. Now, on that issue, Bernie Sanders made a great point in his response to the State of the Union. President Trump brought up a terrible killing in Reno, Nevada by an undocumented immigrant, but he didn't bring up one of the biggest massacres in United States history. That also happened in Nevada. That was a Vegas shooting where over 50 people were murdered in one night. But hey, well, that was all the things that we don't want to ban, and those are our donors who profited off that massacre. So let's deflect and talk about undocumented immigrants that commit less crimes on average than American citizens do. So that's exactly what Matt Gaetz is doing. That's to cover the NRA's ass, which is his job as a water boy for the NRA and all of his donors. He's pathetic. So then he tries to get the Parkland dad who's challenging him thrown out of the meeting.
Exactly. So the water boy did get interrupted in the middle of his anti-immigrant spiel by a father who lost his son in the Parkland shooting. Okay, so the man is Manuel Oliver. Again, his son died because of the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And so he's interrupting Gaetz as he's making this asinine point. And in the next video, you're gonna see Gaetz refer to him, and then I'm gonna give you more on what happened. Take a look.
Is there a process in the committee whereby if the very same people are repeatedly interrupting the time of the members, that those people will be asked to depart the committee? Or is there?
I will, excuse me. If the gentleman repeats that or any other comment, I will directly be removed. I will directly be removed if he repeats it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd observe that's 3 interruptions of my time by the same individual, and that the chair is not utilizing his discretion to remove that individual.
I would like to note that individual's son was murdered by weapons, but I get paid by the weapons manufacturers, so I'm outraged. You're outraged. You're outraged.
So we're gonna hear from Manuel Oliver in just a minute, but one more video from Gaetz, because I want you to get a sense of how unbelievably dismissive our conservative lawmakers are toward Americans who have lost their children to gun violence. I mean, it wasn't enough that some of them will lean on media figures who spread conspiracy theories about them or their children being crisis actors, but then you have actual lawmakers like Gaetz dismiss them and their concerns. Take a look.
We all are entitled to our own opinions and views on how to address gun violence, but I don't believe that we are entitled to our own facts. And while I have great personal affection for the gentleman from Rhode Island, it is deeply troubling to me and hurtful that as I share the experiences of people who've lost sons and daughters, who've lost friends and neighbors at the hands of violent illegal aliens who have illegally acquired firearms, that my colleague would indicate that that's somehow lying or making misrepresentations to the committee. And so if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have solutions for gun violence or to secure our border, or to make sure that illegal aliens don't come into possession of firearms, I'm eager to hear those. If we really cared about safer streets, we would build a wall and secure the border, and we would do it post haste.
Oh, he's the one whose feelings are hurt. Gaetz, his feelings are very, very hurt right now that someone finally called him out for deflecting and focusing on a much smaller issue in comparison to the number of white men who have carried out mass shootings in this country through legally obtained firearms. That's the issue at hand here. Legally obtained firearms. What are you, as a US lawmaker, gonna do to solve that very real problem that people are dealing with, including this father who lost his son in that mass shooting? What are you gonna do? You're gonna deflect because your political donors don't want you to talk about gun control. Okay, fair enough.
So, Matt Gaetz, he went on InfoWars. So it's not like that's who he is. Later, when he got his hand caught in the cookie jar, and people were like, Alex Jones is nuts. And no, it's fine. Finally, he was like, oh yeah, okay, sure. I regret going on InfoWars. Wink, right? No, he's a conspiracy theorist. He's a hack. He's an idiot, and he works for these corporate interests. In this case, this corporate interests that get people killed. There's one massacre a day in America. There's 4 people or more shot and killed. Every single day there's a massacre in America. It's done it's done through guns, and we have more guns and we have more massacres. It's an absolute fact. Matt Gaetz knows it and says, yeah, I know, but you've offended me by interrupting my speech.
Yeah, did your son get murdered and gunned down? Are your feelings hurt over that? And the fact that lawmakers won't do anything about it? He's a lawmaker from the state of Florida, right? So this father who's bringing up a very legitimate concern is the person who's essentially paying him, right? That's your boss right there. And you are so dismissive of a very real problem in this country and a very real devastating situation that this father had to go through because of inaction of lawmakers like you. But okay, nonetheless, I don't want to hear from Gaetz anymore. I actually want to hear from the father. Again, his name is Manuel Oliver. He did an interview following this whole exchange, and he explains what's really going on. Take a look.
He's a salesperson from the Republican Party that it becomes part of the commission. And the reason why I call him a salesperson is because he's selling a project that has no relationship at all with what the discussion was about. What I said is, remember my son, remember us. And then he pointed at me like that. And you don't point at me like that. And then he tried to get me out of the room. And you don't do that. I just reacted as a father. I am still Joaquin's dad, and I will be Joaquin's dad till the last day that I'm here. And anybody that offends my kid will receive an answer from me.
Just think for a second if it was your kid. And you got this guy who's trying to make sure with all of his power that we never do anything about it. I mean, how upset would you be? And he's right, you saw it in the earlier clip. Gaetz points at him like, aren't you gonna do something about that guy? I'm here trying to protect the NRA and this guy's interrupting me.
Let's hear more from Oliver.
The contradiction is, yes, we want to save lives, but wait a minute, the wall will save 4,000. What about the other 40,000? You know who's an immigrant? I'm an immigrant. I did things by the book. My son came from Venezuela. I was trying to find a safer life in here. He got shot by an American white dude. So what's the answer for that? If I don't get it from them, they will get it from me.
So now the right wing will get triggered by that, and they'll say, "Oh, he said white. Oh my God." Blah, blah, blah.
Well, the facts don't care about your feelings, do they?
Yes, and so the reality is, obviously, white people in this country do a lot more shootings, but that's not. Nobody's trying to demonize them over that. What he's fighting back on is, you're trying to demonize immigrants, and you largely do it based on race. So don't come here telling me that my group is the problem when my son got killed, and he was killed by a guy who was born in America, who happens to be a white dude, etc. So I'm not here to demonize them. You're here to demonize me, and I'm not going to stand for it. And in fact, to that point, he said a couple of things that was very TYT. And so he said, "What's the answer for that?" Immediately following the clip that you just saw, he said, "If I don't get it from them, they will get it from me." So look, if you lost your son, what wouldn't you do politically to try to fight back and get some sort of legislation that helps other parents avoid the same fate that you went through? And one more along those lines, he said, "You don't get me out of the room, I'll get you out of that room as soon as I have the chance to vote for someone else."
Bravo.
I love that kind of talk. You do it through politics and you do it through strength.
When we come back, we will discuss a breaking news story involving Jeff Bezos and threats to release nude photos of him.
Well, Bezos, using the Uyghur ideology, the National Enquirer thought they were coming for him, and it turns out, no, he's coming for them. We'll explain. Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.